honourable member for Fredericton.
Speaker, and I thank my honourable colleague from my home province of New Brunswick. He made a comment about trying to support pensioners, and of course on this side of the House we do, and we've increased the CPP contributions, and yet our Conservative friends continue to rail against this. I also heard a lot about the carbon tax, and now in New Brunswick we have the federal backstop where we'll be having those quarterly payments going to help with affordability measures, and yet once again against this. So I'm trying to understand, do we want to help constituents here, or are you really just looking for issues where there aren't any? And I really think it's time that we get on board with pollution pricing in New Brunswick, because it's a good thing for them, and it's a good thing for environmental projects like supporting Indigenous communities and schools. So would you repeal those if you had the chance?
Also need to remember to speak through the chair. The honourable member for New Brunswick Southwest.
Would we repeal the carbon tax? Absolutely. The member knows well the reason why Blaine Higgs is no longer administrating the Liberal carbon tax is because it's ruinous to families. So he's out of the game. He doesn't want anything to do with this Liberal carbon tax, just like now 8 out of 10 provinces. But let me point out something this member said, who says she's for a green economy, but opposes nuclear power. And her colleague from St. John Ross scolded her, because if you want power that is carbon dioxide free, just like other Liberals are realizing, you need to embrace nuclear. She's an outlier on that, and her own colleague from New Brunswick, Liberal colleague from New Brunswick, called her out on that, because this fantasy world of high taxes and no energy is just going to result in a ruinous economy and a ruinous country.
Comments? The honourable member for Fredericton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I thank my honourable colleague for her speech this afternoon. Or this morning. I do say I don't know how helpful it is to speak in hyperbolic terms, and I think that we need to be more collaborative in this House, and I'll take personal offense when it comes to how hard we fight on this side for Indigenous communities, and suggesting that if we were to support this budget, that for those that think that it's wholly inadequate, that we would never have stepped foot in a First Nation community, because that's certainly not true. And so my question is simply, we're looking for creative solutions to address the housing crisis in Indigenous communities across this country. Does the member support the First Nation Fiscal Management Act, which will help Indigenous-led solutions for Indigenous financial institutions leverage funding to help ensure that these kinds of infrastructure projects can move forward?
The honourable member Churchill, Kawana-Nokaski.
Well, I'm not really sure what to do with comments around personal offense. I respect the member's work, and when it comes to speaking out for First Nations, a few short weeks ago, 11 First Nations in our region declared a public state of emergency because the housing, drug, healthcare crisis is so bad. If folks are offended by that reality and can't realize that the Liberals are not addressing that reality, I'm not sure what to say about that. I think we have to be very real about the crisis in communities, certainly in communities where I come from, in northern remote fly-in communities. And this crisis isn't by accident. It is the result of decades of neglect from federal, Liberal and Conservative governments. Canada needs to do much better.
Fredericton.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank my honourable colleague for his speech this morning. And I know he and I share a passion for the environment. It's something I was really excited to see as part of the budget was the Canada Water Agency and protections for our fresh water in the country. So I was just wondering if you could comment on how important that is and how it's achieving a commitment that we've made to Canadians across the country.
The honourable member for West Vancouver, Sunshine Coast, Sea to Sky Country.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I want to thank my colleague from Fredericton for a really important question. There's been many years of work that's been put into designing this new Canada Water Agency. Very excited that it's going to be in the prairies in Winnipeg. And I think it's important as well because there are so many different federal agencies in Canada that have some type of responsibility related to water. And so this will provide an opportunity for all of those different organizations to collaborate in a very meaningful way so that we can better address issues like water quality and water quantity, which we know we're going to increasingly see. And I think it's very important that it is established in Winnipeg because we know the prairies are facing some of the largest challenges with sometimes water scarcity and sometimes flooding. And so very excited to see that in the budget this year because I think it's going to make a really huge difference on one of the most important issues related to the environment.
Questions in his speech this morning, and by the sounds of it, he's kind of supporting some progressive ideas that he had hoped to see in the budget. So my question is simply, can we expect to see in the next Conservative platform things like aggressive emissions reduction targets, support for unions and workers, pharmacare, electoral reform? I'm just curious what his response would be.
The honourable member on order. Can we have some order so the honourable member for Charlotte St. James, Assiniboia Headingley can answer?
You know, the reality is that we need to be able to afford to have these things, Madam Speaker. We have the weakest growth in the OECD countries, despite having doubled our debt, more than doubled our debt to over $1.3 trillion since this government took office. We need to grow the economy. We need to have policies that create more wealth so that we can afford the important programs Canadians deserve.
Speaker. I thank the member for his speech this afternoon. And I think he wants to focus on healthcare. We learned a lot about cats and mice and that, and I get the message he's really trying to convey there. But I want to get us back on track with the Budget Implementation Act. And for me, healthcare is certainly top of mind, as we know it is for Canadians across this country. And in my home riding of New Brunswick, $1.3 million was held back in federal health transfers because we were in contravention of the Canada Health Act for reproductive services, for diagnostic testing. So my question is, how can we work together in this place to ensure that the public universal health care system is upheld in this country?
Honourable member for Edmonton Grisba.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I do have a great respect for the member opposite. However, I do think that she may have missed a really critical part of our analogy here. When we have a public healthcare system like the one we have in Canada that should guarantee access and administration for regular everyday Canadians across the country, it's up to this government to actually enforce the Canada Health Care Act. Because, Madam Speaker, the reality is, right now in my home province of Alberta, there's private surgeries taking place already in contravention of the Canada Health Act, but the government allows it. They continue to make transfers. They continue to send money to the provinces and not enforce it. So my question back to the member would be, when will they enforce the Health Care Transfers Act?